Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saved by Grace. We're here doing episode 5, and we're excited to be sharing this new episode with you guys. We have a great, amazing man of God. He's part of my ministry with George, and it's been a blessing getting to know this gentleman. We want to welcome Erik. Erik, welcome to the episode, brother.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you
man,
for having me.
Yeah, he's every conversation, ever since he's been back, because I know he's one of the veterans, you could say, of the church, But his testimony is such a blessing. Just having conversations that we've had before leading up to the podcast has truly ministered to my heart. And I know he's had conversations with Oscar, and I know it's blessed Oscar, right, Oscar?
Yeah, Erik, welcome to the podcast. Like we were sharing, the purpose of this podcast is ideally to hear the stories of people who have been walking with the Lord, their testimonies could be glorify the magnitude of God's grace over our life, and so welcome to the podcast. For those of us who don't know you as much, it's going to be a blessing, I know, hearing from what God has been doing in your life. I don't know if you could share with us a little bit of who you are, how you started coming to church. This guy's always has a smile on his face, man. He's always smiling. He's always full of joy. So, it's awesome to have you here, bro.
Oh, man. Thank you, guys. It's awesome to be here. I've been following the podcast for some time, even before coming back to CFF, and it's been amazing to see what you guys are doing here, and it's an honor to be here, to be able to share with you guys. So who am I? That's, I think, a question that I often find myself asking myself, because there's so many layers. But I think to get it in a nutshell, who I am is a man whose life has gotten transformed through the Lord. Somebody who has found the answers to life, right? To the answer to life, not the answers, and that is Jesus. I have a beautiful family. With the love of my life. Shout out Evelyn. Love you, baby. I have a beautiful son. I have actually family members. I have my brother who introduced me to Christ here, my sisters who are amazing, Amber, Ellie.
When you came into CFF for the first time, I don't know if you could tell us, how did you find our church? How long have you been coming to church with us?
I first walked into CFF about 9 years ago. When I was 21, my brother was relentless in introducing me to God. My brother is somebody who's, he had an encounter with God. He had an encounter with Jesus, and immediately turned to us, to his siblings, to do the same, right? What he experienced, he needed us to do it as well, because we grew up in a broken home. We grew up with a lot of hardship, a lot of division. And I think, like, an answer to like the way we were living life before Christ, it was just through action, right? It's to try to be successful, right, through action. I think when my brother had that encounter with God, he knew immediately who he needed to introduce us to, right? Sharing the same hardships. And so he was relentless about, me going to encounter me, coming to CFF. I remember it was in August when I started coming to church, because it was his birthday. So he used that as an excuse, because I was like, all right, bro, like, what do you want for your birthday? He's like, I want you to come to church, And I was like, no, dude, like, I'm not ready for it. I don't want to go. Like, that's not for me. We grew up Catholic, right? Although we never practiced anything. He you guys know my brother. He just nailed until it's like, okay, cool. So then I decided to come to CFF. At first, like, man, it was so different. The worship, I never experienced worship like that. And I think worship is so powerful, because I heard once, music doesn't need an invitation to your soul. It's just being in God's presence. And so from that moment on, and then seeing, right, being introduced to everybody seemed so happy. And I remember asking, like, man, is this real? Like, what do they have that I don't? Because it seemed like, you would hear about people having also problems and people going through stuff, but they always had that hope, that faith. and yeah, so I came to CF. My brother brought me to CFF. Started coming regularly. There was, in the beginning, it was a little rocky, right? I was still kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Then I went to my encounter and had that same experience. Experienced something beautiful. I think I tried to put an expectation to what I was going to experience, and it didn't meet my expectation. But through the people here at CFF, they were able to break it down and, really shine light on what I did experience, and how God moved. And I'm like, and it allowed me to reflect, and spent in that reflection, it was spending time with the Lord. And it's like, you know what? This is true, God is here. God is with me. He has been with me. There is a bright future that doesn't involve the hardships from prior, right? Being such a young believer, I got a job opportunity that was very crucial for where I wanted to be in the future. And I ended up taking that job. I pulled away from CFF. This was, right around 9 years ago. I ended up getting pulled away for this job opportunity, and I try to stay connected. I try to talk to my leader at the time. I try to, stay in the Word, but it's just not the same with a community of people, right? So then I went back out into the world. Everything happened that, a whole life happened. There was that job that I took ended up benefiting me for where I am now. But it's not because of that job, it's because of God's promises at the time, God's promises and his faithfulness to always want what's in our best interest. He knows the desires of our hearts, and he keeps our promise, and I feel when I walked away, he kept his promise, I didn't. So for about 8 to 9 long years, I had family members, I had my sister, Ellie, and Amber consistently praying for us. When I would see them, and cut me off if you guys need to, or if you guys want to get into other things, but when I would see them, they wouldn't necessarily try to hound on me. They always were loving. They always showed grace. They always showed respect, being older brother. But I think for a lot of years, I tried not to be as close to them, because I knew the life that I was living didn't have anything to offer them. And it's not a life of, addiction or out in the streets or anything like that. I think it's just things that are rooted in our souls that were affecting me, and not in, beyond the surface.
A lot of I see you with a smile all the time. You're it's such a beautiful thing to see. Sometimes we see people at church and we don't really know the whole story. So I thank God, that for your willingness to share, and as you're sharing this, you could see your past, how it had an impact in your life, and the core of our church is Faith Family Center, and what a beautiful thing that the moment your brother came, he thought about his family, and your sister Amber, you were talking about your sister Amber, your sister Ellie, that they always had you in prayer, whenever we would fast, whenever there was prayer walls to bring our family back, you were always there, right? And you were saying something about walking away, but even though you walked away, because of the world, pull was a little harder than staying. Your family never took you off their prayers, right? And so tell us a little bit about that. Someone that was prayed for, now is sitting here thinking like, God, your grace brought me back. How do you see that now? What can you tell someone that know they're being prayed for, but like you said, are staying away? Because they may think they're not ready. They may think they don't have anything of value to offer.
Something that I can share with them, and what I wish I knew back then, is don't resist so much. Don't let strongholds, or don't let whispers or things in your mind make you think that it's going to be a certain way. You know, it's like, I remember thinking like, I have to spend time with God. I have to have that relationship. I have to initiate that time with God again. Again, going back to, I was thinking in actions, right? What do I have to do, instead of thinking who I am, who we are, who, you know, as creations of God, who we really are. And I think that's something that's important. You know, you're feeling sad, you're feeling mad, you're feeling distant, doesn't matter. Show up and God will do his thing. And that's something that I wish that I realized a lot sooner. Because again, it's not actions that drive him to love us or to have grace over our life, but it's who we are, you know. And what I would tell somebody who is praying for family members that seems like there's no hope, like, continue to pray, keep that steadfast spirit that in God's timing, people will show up. Because as I was saying earlier, you know, there was nobody really, they weren't evangelizing me every time they saw me. They weren't trying to, you know, be religious about their relationship with the Lord. They were just being loving. They were reflecting God's character and fighting in prayer, you know, fighting in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how that would go? Because I'm assuming you would see them, right? And you knew they were going to church. They knew you weren't. And, like, was it awkward where, like, you're like, oh, I know they're praying. They're going to... Were you thinking like, oh, they're gonna tell me to go to church, so you would avoid them, or you know, how were they being Christ in those moments in your life when you didn't want to listen, right?
Yeah, so I think what I would try to do is control the conversations we would have initially, right? So I would have conversations about the natural, you know, how's your job, how's this, how's that, avoiding going into hardships, because I knew it's like, okay, that's gonna give them an opening, and they're gonna tell me about God, and so I would, you know, everything's fine, everything's good, you know, we're doing fine, you know, Evelyn's great, my son's great, like we're good, we're okay, and so I would try to control those things, but I think, man, they have grown so much spiritually that they saw beyond that. You know, and I think they were tempted. You know, I think they were tempted to be like, all right, this is my chance to talk about Jesus. And not to say that they didn't at all, but it's through their life that they showed it. And just keeping that steadfast, because when the day that I decided to turn away from myself, from the world, it made me call Eli. It made me call, like, the person that I, like, in the moment that I knew was I felt so far away from God that I needed to feel closer to him. And she was the closest person that I could feel like to God, you know? And again, through her actions, through the way that she has lived her life, the way that, you know, she started her family. And it just brought me to that point, you know, to where I said, I have to, like, I can't do this. I have to turn away from this. I know God is the answer. I didn't know how to take that first step towards God. So I reached out to my sister, and that's when her and Anthony just started pouring into.
I don't know if you could tell us a little bit more about that. We were talking, you know, about hitting rock bottom, you know, and how sometimes, you know, the Lord allows these rock bottoms to pick us up, you know, and so thank God you had Eli. Thank God you had, you know, your family there that you knew were praying, that you could turn to. But, you know, I don't know if you could share with us a little bit of what happened, you know, of how you came back to church, and what was that pivotal moment that you're like, man, you know that I need to go there. I haven't gone there, but I'm gonna take that first step.
So I'll go back a little bit into the 8 years that I lived away from CFF, right? So after that, my career, something that I've been always very driven is for success, for actions, to drive in accomplishment. So after I left CFF, you know, career paths started opening up. You know, there was growth in every area that was going on, or that I was going through, and again, the success, the finances, the everything that comes with the standard of success to the world. So in that, everything started looking great. Everything started working out. Year after year, there was progress. There was growth. But in that time, there was things in my soul, or I think it was when I became a parent. When my son was born 3 years ago, I became a parent where in those 8 years, I thought that I was okay. I thought, like, you know what, things are going well. Great things are happening. I'm engaged. I'm going to get married. We buy a home. We do all these things. And it was until my son was born that I think is where the wounds in our soul really start to show. And it was in those moments where, in that time, I felt fear like I never felt before. I felt things like resentment, anger, other things, not towards anyone specific, but when you have a wound in your soul and somebody gets close to it, it's an open wound that'll hurt you, and sometimes it doesn't take much, so I think in that time, and parenting is hard. Parenting with somebody that grew up completely different than you is hard, and there was a lot of things that through parenting God ministered to me in. But there's also a lot of pain that I realized that I had. And so there was things in my soul that were hurting me, that would make me feel resentment, anger, and would, in a way, I was like, if I'm not getting this here after all this success that we're going through, like that I'm bringing, right? There was a sense of self-idolatry, entitlement that didn't necessarily come in arrogance. Pride comes in many different forms. And I was like, okay, well, it's things that you start doing that go against the people that you love, right? So hurting the people that I love the most is what brought me to rock bottom. I turned into somebody that I tried my whole life to avoid being, and I tried through everything that I was doing that seemed great, right? Because I would see people all the time like, hey, dude, like, man, your life is completely different from high school. Your life is completely different from your upbringing. Like, I applaud you, right? Like, this is amazing. But it's that hurt, right, that starts small and then continues to grow. And you end up hurting the people that you love the most. And I was tired of that. I experienced that, right? I was on the end of being hurt through emotion-driven actions, and I remember crying out to God, like when I hit that rock bottom, and just asking Him, God, like, I can't do this by myself. I tried.
As we're sitting here and I'm listening to you, you said something a little while ago. You said, we as men need to stop being so resistant. We need to stop being someone we're not, because I know when we come to church, yeah, it's beautiful that we go to encounter, we have this encounter with Christ. We have, we're set on fire for the Lord, right? As men. But then something we don't realize, is something that I realized later down in my walk with Christ, was that we still tend to hide hurt. We still tend to hide wounds. And we justify those wounds by doing ministry. We hide those wounds by hey, but I'm serving the Lord. But then as I'm listening to you talk right now, like, hey, like, I want to ask you, like, what can you tell these men, especially because you've been around for 9 years, although you were away, but you came back. But in those 9 years, God never took His hand off of you. God never took His hand off of you, and He guided you everywhere you went, right? But, like me, I'm sitting here just listening to you. I'm reflecting on my own life. Like, man, like I really became someone I wasn't. I'm like, I tried so hard to hide my wounds. I tried so hard I don't want people to see how vulnerable I was, because I'm like, now I gotta maintain this also image. I'm a tough dude.
I'm an animal.
Yeah. I'm like, I can't be
I'm
weak
built for this. Yeah.
But then when the Holy Spirit began to come in, I'm gonna start crying too. But when the Holy Spirit came into my heart, like, I felt His Spirit like, hey, like, you're still a little boy. Like you have to open up yourself. You have to stop being so resistive and allow Christ, like, hey, like, it's okay to be vulnerable. You're my son. So I want, like, what advice can you give these men who are being resistive, who be like, hey, I'm saved, I went to encounter, I'm good, like, I don't have to be vulnerable again. But that's not the case, because although, yeah, we had an encounter, we went to encounter, there's still a next step. There's always a next step with Christ. What can you tell these men who are being so resistive, who are having that tug of war internally, like, hey, I'm saved, I don't want to be vulnerable anymore, but what can you give these men that are having a hard time being vulnerable?
I would tell them, we are called to be men. We are called to be strong. We are called to be warriors. We are called to fight. But we're called to do that with God by our side, right? We're called to do that for a different kingdom than what this world offers, and it's important to know the fight that you're in so that you can use those principles. Because also, I see you, bro, like, and you are an animal, you are a man. People think that you give your life to Christ and you have to become this person that's just like, everything is good, great, right? It's like, no, we're gonna have hardships, and that's, God calls hardships to grow us. He disciplines us. To me, in my life, I felt like that rock bottom. Now looking back at it in retrospect, it was so awesome because it was a form of discipline. God said, son, you are strong. You are what you feel in your heart that you are. You are that man that wants to fight for your family. You are that man that wants to fight for your blessings. But the world has nothing to compensate for when you win that fight. And it's God who is the reward and who goes before you in these battles and who you fight for. Because, in the world, you can fight for all these things. You can fight for, I think success is a big one for man. Purpose is a big one for man, that it's like, okay, I need to have a purpose. You think because you have success that you have purpose. And that I was stuck in that for a long time. I have success, I have purpose, but everything else in my life was falling apart. Everything with my family was falling apart piece by piece. It didn't all crumble as soon as a problem started, right? It was little things, just boom. It was like little drops of water every time that would weaken my foundation, right? And that foundation was worked through my own hands. When that's what the world tells you to be. But I would tell men that are fighting that, it's like, keep that fighting spirit, keep that battle, that heart of a warrior, but apply it with biblical principles, because that's when you will see the results that will really fulfill your heart. That I'm seeing now, that there's a lot of things that, when this happened, there were situations that I wish were different. But I knew that they couldn't be, because I knew that God needed to form me to be the warrior that I need to be, and through prayer, right? Through a realm that we cannot see, that is real, through the spiritual warfare, through the spirits that are, the enemy's out to get us. The Bible says that, our war isn't against flesh and blood. It's about it's with the evil spirits of this world, right? And so that's what I would tell them. You want to know what it means to be a man, a real man? Walk with Christ. Walk with Christ, because there's nothing easy about it, but there's so much more reward than anything that the world can offer.
Right, and I think it goes hand in hand with having one foot in, one foot out. When these men have that internal battle, that internal struggle, and they're like, man, I don't want to be vulnerable, so they go back to the world where, like, no one exposes them. They think, a lot of these men think coming to Christ, like, they shouldn't get exposed anymore. A lot of these men that come to Christ are like, why would God want to expose me? He healed me. No, because if you're not exposing those ugly things that you have formed on your own understanding, those things that you have allowed the enemy to root in your heart, Jesus wants to expose. Jesus wants to uproot those roots so his roots can begin to grow in your heart, right? So, like, but all that is to say is, like, no matter what, Eric, although, yeah, you did stray away for some years, you came back, right? And there's something that God did in that time that you went away, right? Yeah. So how can you share your experience, like, who you were when you first came to Christ and how you are now? Like, what was the biggest difference? What can you say, like, what did God do in those times that you were away?
So from the moment that I first came to Christ at 21, you know, I was in a way winging it. I don't think I was as intentional, right? I wasn't as, although I was receiving a lot of great things, you know, the community, the leadership here was blessing me. But the difference between 9 years ago and now is that my intentions to serve the Lord is probably my biggest purpose, right? In becoming who he needs me to be and not wasting time because I have a family behind me. You know, I talked to Pastor Pablo at the first encounter that I went to in October. And, you know, we were kind of talking. It's like, hey, you know, it's kind of crazy. Like, you know, I told him, like, man, I went away and now it's so different. He's like, yeah, because you were a young boy when you first came to Christ. Now you're a man. And I was like, wow, like, you know, I have my generations to think about. One thing that motivates me a lot is my son and his son and the rest of my generations that are to follow. Because, you know, in my family, there's a lot of general curses in everybody's families, but there's a lot of things that through my family, through my broken home, through, you know, not having my dad as close as present to me, through, you know, just resentment, things that were building, not to talk bad on any of them. They didn't know any better, right? Those things were passed on to them. And so now that I have the opportunity to make a change for the rest of my generation, and mind you, my parents are still here and still alive, and God is changing their life as well. You know, and so just to have that and think about the generations that are coming after me, man, if that doesn't drive a man, I don't know what is. Before I was thinking, I'm going to leave them an inheritance. I'm going to leave them a company that, you know, they have to run, that they will have finances, that they will not struggle, that they will be able to use for their future. They're not going to go through financial burdens like we did, right? That when we would ask for things that, you know, it always came with a price, you know, and there was 5 of us, so I can't imagine that being easy. But it's through the future, through looking ahead, through having that vision for your generations that are to come, that it's important for me, my time here now, for the fruits that are to come later. And I don't have any time to waste. Am I perfect? No. Do I fall? No. But there's a video that I saw from Nipsey Hussle, a rapper that passed away, right? That he was talking about business and success. And he's like, you go through every emotion with this. You know, he was motivating and telling people, you know, you go through every emotion doing this, but that's what it is. I applied that same thing, but I applied that to Christ now. You know, it doesn't matter. Can I want to walk away? Am I angry? Do I think things are unfair? I decided that my life, I need to go through all those emotions, through all those things with Christ. And there is no turning back anymore.
And, you know, your little boy, man, I love that little guy. You know, his little boy, if you guys know Spidey and Friends, you know, he called me Rhino. Right? When he saw me Rhino. He called me Rhino. But when he called me that, man, it brought something to me, right? But, you know, I know Oscar Oliver, and some people know I have my son, right? I mean, he's not hidden, right? But my son, right? I didn't find out he was my son until he was 3 years old. Wow. Right? I didn't know he was my son until he was 3. And, you know, I had asked myself, like, I even asked Pastor, like, why did I wait so long? Like, why did God keep him from me for so long, you know? And I remember having a conversation with Pastor, and he was like, imagine the pain you would have brought him if you would have known he was your son. And I'm like, that's true. Because I was selfish, bro. I wouldn't have cared of my actions. I wouldn't have cared if I was hurting him or not, because I was so worried about me. Because I didn't have Christ, right? I was self-centered. I was like, I'm only gonna care, like, oh, if he's my boy, he'll be all right. He'll be okay. But I want to ask you a question, because, you know, I know Oscar, the way he ministers to his son, the way he sets the standard for his son. How important is it for you that your son knows Christ through how you live? It
plays into being one of the, you know, the purpose that I want to follow, the purpose that I have, right? Because now, growing up, I never really had a father figure I never had a father figure to turn to when things got tough. So who did I turn to? Myself, right? Now, through this discipline that I talk about the Lord having in my life, allowing me to go through that hardship, I'm able to turn to him for guidance. Like, okay, you disciplined me, Lord. You made me go through this, but what do I do from here? What should my heart be from here? So I think it's important for my son to, one, understand that his father, his earthly father, is here, but better than me is that his heavenly father will never forsake him, and it's important for me to show him. He's 3 years old. He understands a lot. He's amazing.
He does.
He talks a lot. He has a spiritual gift of just, of joy. He's just he's so awesome. Oliver, actually, I think you've taken my favorite picture that I have with him, and it was service at the park when I came back from Encounter, and we were worshiping in the front.
I remember that picture.
Shout out to you, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
It's amazing for him to know that, to see his father be vulnerable under the Lord, but also be a man here on earth and live with that purpose. God is my purpose. It's important for him to see his dad, right, his hero, the person that he's going to look up to, be vulnerable to that, because that will save him so much hardship. Now, is it going to make his life easy? No. But he will know who to turn to when he needs to, when he's in those hardships. And when he's in joy too. When things are going great, he needs to know that God provides. I pray with him pretty often, if not every morning, every night. And we've started doing this thing. Before, I would just say, repeat after me. And he would repeat, he'd be, Jesus. And, thank you for my life. Thank you for my mommy. Thank you for my daddy. And then, amen. Protect me, guide me, amen. And now he starts being thankful, right? He's like, Jesus, thank you for my toys. Thank you for my food. Thank you for my shirt. Thank you for my dinosaurs. And it's like, we can look at it as, people can look at it and say that it's materialistic, but it's not. The Lord really does provide, and at this point, maybe through those things, God is ministered to him. I pray that he, at 3 years old, is still sensitive to the Lord's presence. But, he needs to know that's where it starts at that age. It is your toys right now, but the Lord provided those toys, and so as he gets older, it'll be his home, it'll be his wife, it'll be his finances, it'll be his ministry, and that's important to me, because that's what I'm called to do, is to change my generations, and he's my firstborn. I love him, and I hope to keep this podcast around until he's old enough to see,
I have two questions. First one is in 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. You were speaking earlier that even though you were not struggling in the world, you were having riches and everything, but you were lonely inside. And I haven't had the chance to know you as well as also an Oscar here, but did you already have a family at that time?
She was my girlfriend at the time, but when I was feeling lonely, I did have a family, and it's not until something really fills you, right? Your family, I think, is meant to fill your heart to an extent, but it's really the Lord's presence. And at Oscar, I don't think I've ever told you this, but at this last encounter, when you prayed for me, for loneliness to be gone, I didn't know that was something that I struggled with. In the surface, I was like, no, I feel okay. I would never catch myself thinking, oh man, I feel alone today, like my family's not here, or being with my fiance or being with my son. I didn't feel alone, but it wasn't until God brought that revelation to my life and took me back to being a little boy, and making me realize that I did struggle with loneliness. I struggled with abandonment, and I didn't feel it at the time, but looking in retrospect, I was scared for people to leave me. So I thought if I didn't provide, and my fiance at the time never indicated anything of this, but it's the strongholds and the things in our mind that we hold on to from the wounds of that we go through the trauma. And so I thought, if I don't provide, if I'm not patient, if I'm not present, like, my family's going to go to shambles, and I avoided and stepped away from all that. So it was the practical things that I was implying, that I thought is what I needed to do, but it was the spiritual that I was lacking. And so if I would have kept going down that spiritual ruin, right, and not having God in my life, that's eventually would have happened. But it's by God's grace that, He was able to keep my family and now restoring my family.
You were talking that Oscar had encounter, he was there for you, which leads me to my second question, actually, which is in Proverbs 2:6-10. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the path of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. Then wisdom enters the heart, and knowledge is pleasant to your soul. Since we're talking about family right now that you understand Christ, now that you understand that you have a family, a community, how has that changed you and how you lead your family, not just your immediate family, but also like your sisters? How are you leading them now as an older brother?
Through reciprocating, through reflecting, God's character. I think that as I get to know Jesus more, his love, his grace, his mercy, his generosity, as a man, I try to reflect that, right? I often, ask myself, okay, what would Jesus do in this situation? Or how would Jesus be in this situation, right? Because when you're confronted by your dad, you're like, all right, like, what would he do? And he does, it's not like he's watching you, like pointing the finger, you better do this. But it's just like, okay, son, here's an opportunity for you to grow, and it's, and it doesn't have to be in bad situations. It can just be listening and being sensitive to what he puts in your heart, my dad has always been a person that has showed us love. Although there was a lot of absence when he was there, man, love poured out of him. And so that's something that I feel that because of that love, I'm able to do the same. So my people, when I love, or just anybody, my people, when I love them, and people, when I love them, And not to say, I don't say when, as a form of people are excluded from that, but my closest people, I make sure that the understanding that I have of love now reflects God with the posture of my heart and not so much my actions. Does that make sense?
Well, can you illustrate that a little better? Like, how do you show that love? Like, give me an example. What does that mean?
So, I think patience. There was a time where I was always short fuse, quick to feel offended or be or have a temperament, not in the form of screaming, but it's instead in the form of withholding, right? In the form of like staying quiet. Sometimes pride would kick in, so those two are not good mixtures, That's not good. I praise God for showing me, for forming me in those areas. So I think patience is a big thing, knowing that it's not about me, that I'm not, I shouldn't be self-centered, right? And it's not just through serving somebody a warm plate of food, right? It's how you serve it. How does your heart look when you serve that, right? It's not the action, but it's the heart behind the action. And so everything that I do with my family now, with my sisters, with my son, with my fiance, how am I doing it? Because I think prior to Christ in that time period, I would do these things, but it wouldn't really be meaningful, right? As meaningful as it is now. In the time, you don't realize that it's not meaningful, but now coming to Christ and he lifts that veil and really shows you what love is, that's when you can compare the two. And you realize, like, wow, there is a transformation, through Christ when he really confronts you about the posture of your heart.
I love what you're saying about your parents. You honor them, and you're absolutely right. Our parents did the best that they could with what was given to them, and so I think it's such a wonderful thing that we honor our fathers and our mothers, even though they might have been there, but the being present might have been what caused and a lot of us the loneliness, the wounds. But through Christ, you received healing, right? And And that's such a beautiful thing through your testimony. Now I see you with your son. I see you, loving him, the way you talk to him, the way that even when he's looking behind us and talking to us lovingly, correcting him, redirecting him, and it's such a beautiful thing to see what live out what our church is all about. It's about families, about the faith that brings back families at the center. I wanted to also point that out, because I think your testimony is it's such the blueprint of what our faith at church is, right? Like families that pray for their brothers, for their sisters, right? A brother that goes to encounter and goes back and say, my brother has to see this. A sister that doesn't stop praying, that regardless of how many years it's been, I will continue to pray for my brother, regardless of what I see, and what a beautiful testimony we get to see through your life, Erik. Now that you have a son, the battles seem different, right? Because before, when you were by yourself, if you were taken out, it was stopped there. But now that you have your son, you have your fiance, the battle is different, but God has now equipped you, built you up, and had purpose for all that pain, So, I thank God for your life. I thank God that through it all, you're smiling through it all, man. Even though those tears come through your eyes, man, that smile doesn't leave you, that joy doesn't leave you, So, I'm so thankful that you're sharing this with us. So I want to thank you for that, because you're welcome us into the pain that has the wounds that are now scars, right? But what can you tell those who are listening through your experience of what it's meant to be prayed for, even though in moments of leaving the church? That's one. And then what can you tell someone that has a reasons, looking from afar, like kids that they should be fighting, but are still thinking like that's not enough reason to fight for what God has for them, right? Like your generation now is different because of the way you wage your wars. But I see so many parents that have sons and daughters that are not fighting the same, maybe because there's a veil that hasn't yet been removed. What can you tell us through your experience of when you saw the veil removed, and how now you see that there's a bigger battle than you thought there was?
I would say stop fighting the feeling of being vulnerable, because only through that vulnerability you will really see the real war that we're at, that's at hand, the spiritual battles. You asked that, how is it different with my son, and how the battle is now, or how I fight the battles now with my son behind me. And it's God ministers to me through that, right? Because as I hold my son, when we spend quality time together, when we hang out, when he calls me daddy, when he asks me for help, he's a perfect example of how we should be to the Lord, and that's when it's time to battle. That's who I go to. I go to my dad. I think there's a lot of fatherlessness that has been on this world for a really long time. That's one of the enemy's strongest weapons, right? In men, he takes away a father figure so that you feel like you have to figure things out on yourself. And when you feel like you do, he makes you the king of the world, right? And then it leaves you in a position where you think that you don't need help. But I think just what I would tell people is just pay attention to the fruits, pay attention to what's around you. Similar to me, there was a life of success when it came to things of this world that are amazing, that I believe are from God. But there's also things that are in your soul that aren't being moved by the outside, that by the action. So look at the fruits. What does that mean? Look at how you feel. Look at the battles, the internal battles that you're going through when you're succeeding, or when you think things are going good, or when you think that enough time is going to go by. Does it really go by? I felt in those 8 years, I felt like man, I finally conquered all the things of my childhood that I don't have trauma from. You know, I was like, I'm good, I'm happy, I'm going to do right by my family. My son was born, and it was a blessing. It is a blessing, and that's not when things started. The enemy is tricky. He's a snake. You know, he knows where to slither, and he knows where to work. And it's through, again, little feelings, right? Little resentment, like, oh, you know, why didn't she let me pick him up that time? Or, you know, why didn't you know, XYZ, you know, or I think what happens a lot in relationships that aren't built with in certain relationships is that once family or kids get introduced to a picture, it's easy to shy away from the real relationship, right, between you and your partner. And so, although I would catch myself feeling neglected in those times, I would always know that my responsibility is here. But in comparison and using that as reference, when the fruits of that, right, the fruits of all the success happening at the time, and with people, and how my heart was feeling, in the way that my inner wounds should have been healed, it wasn't happening, right? It was actually getting worse. You know, and so that's what I would tell men. You know, I know it's hard. I know the older we get, the more prideful we get, right? Because it's a longer battle that we've been fighting, and we feel like we've been winning. But it's all a facade. It's all fake. You know, it's lies from the enemy that makes you think that you don't need that vulnerability before the Lord, or you can't fight a war by yourself. You know, you can't. You need an army. You need a general. You need a leader. And what better person than God, you know, because then you start fighting those wars with love. You start fighting those with fruits of the Holy Spirit. And that's where you see the true difference. And you're like, wow, this is crazy.
I want to, the last thing I want to share, this podcast, the word that we had from it is found on Ephesians 2:4-8, and it's funny that you mentioned that men particularly feel like it's our actions, the fruit that we bring, what we can produce that can solve everything, even the wounds, the deepest wounds, but the Bible says that, but God, who is rich in mercy because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together in Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the ages to come he might show his exceedingly riches of grace and his kindness towards us in Jesus Christ, that for grace you have been saved through faith, and that not out of yourself, but a gift of God, not through works, lest anyone should boast. There's nothing that you and I can do, because then we will boast about it. If you and I receive salvation through our actions, we will say, I did this because I did X, Y, and Z, and that's why I'm saved. But there's nothing that you and I can do. We receive his salvation, his love is by grace, by just mere love, right? And I think going back to your sisters and your brother, what can you tell them to finish off, or to kind of wrap things up? And I know you're very grateful, and I'm sure you told them, but to maybe also encourage those of us who have brothers and sisters that maybe can learn from Eli, they can learn from your sister, from your brother, right? They can learn from them that were there, despite so many things that they've seen in those 8 years. What can you tell first them, and then encourage us who have brothers and sisters who haven't yet come to Christ?
I would like to tell them thank you. My heart is full of gratitude for, again, the way that they have followed the Lord, for the way that they stood on their promise and they decided to hold on to it. 8 years is a long time to pray for somebody. Like, that's, it's a long time, right? But they continued to do it. They continued to wait, just stand on victory, trust the Lord in that time. And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to my brother for introducing our whole family to the Lord, and I want to tell him not to forget that, he knows God, he is a man of God, but not to forget his power, not to forget, the Lord that we serve. And maybe not forget's not the right word. Maybe it's just continue to remember, I don't know what I would tell him, but yeah, his family, he just got married. It's amazing. I'm so happy for them. And so it's not going to be long before his kids are born. And hopefully God gives me the opportunity to help him in those times if needed, and then my sisters just keep that steadfast, because not only did they pray for me, but they were not expecting my return, but they were ready for it because of because of who they trust God to be and who they trust to be in the Lord, And I would encourage people that have brothers and sisters to continue to pray, because you guys may have an idea of how much is needed, but there is so much pain that fills and covers people if prayer doesn't, And I think for me, my testimony or my situations could have been a lot worse. But it's my siblings, my family's prayers that I believe protected me, and the Lord decided to discipline me instead of in a gracefully and beautiful way.
Sit here and look at you, bro, and just hear your testimony. I can say that you're a man who's fully surrendered to Christ. You're a man of God, and you're a man that allows Jesus to lead him. And when your son's a teenager, when your son is an adult, I know your son's gonna be like, yeah, my dad walked with Christ. And I think as men, the most important thing we could leave our children, our sons, our daughters. Sure, it's an inheritance. That's good. But how beautiful is it that we could leave our children Christ? How beautiful is it that knowing that we could I'd rather my son say, hey, my dad was a follower of Christ. I'd rather my son say, my dad's the one that followed Christ no matter what. I don't care if my dad was rich. What's that gonna do? Because my son could spend that within times, But an inheritance would be, my dad knew Christ and I know Christ because of that. And now my grandchildren are going to know Christ, right? But, Eric, listening to your testimony, brother, and, your battles, like Oscar said earlier, your battles are a lot different now than they were 9 years ago, But the difference is you're fighting things in prayer. You're fighting things with Christ. You're fighting things, because me and you are co-servants, we walk together, But, we always say, I always bring it home at the end and stuff like that, but you're going to wrap it up right now. But I want you to make a statement to these men, to these fathers who are still being selfish, to these men who are still living in the world, these men who think being a provider who is enough, right? I want you to tell these men, or give advice to those men that need Christ for the generations, because as men, we don't think our consequences are going to affect our generations, right? Because when we see the life of David, God didn't punish him, and he didn't punish Solomon, but what came after Solomon, it was done, right? And we don't think of that, right? We don't think because of our actions, it's not going to hurt our generations, but it does, So these men that are having trouble submitting to our God, to Jesus, these men who are afraid to submit, these men who are afraid of authority, what can you tell these men how important it is to be a prayer warrior, to be a pastor of the home, to submit,
I'm a man that loves war. I'm a man that loves a fight. I'm a man that is willing to fight for what I love. And I know that there are men out there that are the same way. And if you want to start winning real wars, surrender your life to Christ, because it's only through him that you can really win. You want to change the atmosphere in your home. You want to change your heart. You want true transformation, and you want to stop being lied to, be made a fool of by an enemy that is real, that's just waiting to prowl on you. Surrender your life to Christ, because it is only through him that we can win these wars. And it's fun. It's fun to fight for Jesus, It's fun to fight for love people for brokenness, because we come from that, right? My heart comes from just pain, but instead of using that pain to hurt other people, I use that pain to glorify God, and just surrender, and then you'll know what it means to become a real warrior.
And to wrap it up, I've heard people, how can I find peace? How can I feel comfort? By going to war. You can't get peace without going to war. But thank you, Erik, for coming on. Your testimony blessed us. It's going to reach so many people. And, I just want to thank Oscar and Oliver, for the amazing questions, and really, just truly being here in the setting, and allowing God to use you, Erik, and use these men to glorify Him. But we thank you guys for tuning in. We hope that Erik's testimony blessed you guys, and we're excited to be sharing what God's doing in our lives. But we love you guys, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.